Thank you very much, Dr. Isaacs, and I really enjoyed your small Freudian slip. Thank you very much, Doctors Masindi and Mugwenya, for being the examining panel today, and thank you to Dr. Tosin, my supervisor, for attending this session. And of course, a very big thank you to my colleagues from Da Vinci who are attending this presentation. The title of my presentation, which is the title of my thesis, and this has been slightly modified since the proposal, is a conceptual business incubator framework for junior mineral exploration and development in a South African perspective. My presentation is going to be following four major sections. And as Dr. Isaac said, yes, this is primarily focused on the literature review, which is part 2, and part 3 being the research methodology. But as we have maybe a slightly new panel and maybe new colleagues from Da Vinci, there is a part 1, which is the context, which provides aspects such as the context, motivation, and philosophical foundation. And then part 4 is the conclusion, where I propose my expected outcomes and contribution. So diving straight into the presentation in that of part 1 of the context. And here I try and explain the global context and rationale for this study. Critical minerals, as we all know, to meet most sustainable development scenarios far exceeds current supplies. And that's something like 5 times for lithium, 10 times for copper, etc. Africa hosts over 30%, perhaps more, of potential critical mineral supply. And here is the next 2 bullets are 2 of the most critical bullets and form the foundation of my study. 60% of these mineral discoveries are made by junior companies, and junior companies are defined as those companies which are listed sub $100 million and are typically involved in the exploration and mine development process. They're not miners. And of these, 90% fail before they achieve commercial success. However, if one of these junior companies belongs to one of only 3 integrated mining incubators in the world, the 162 group out of Ireland, the Lundin and Hunter Dickinson group out of Canada, they achieve 0, 0, and 12.5% failure rates, which is very much less than the 90% if they were standalone. And therefore, this research aims to translate these learnings into a Southern African-centered ecosystemic framework linking geological, financial, and social capital to improve junior exploration mining success. So if I revisit my problem statement, objectives, and research aim, my problem statement is there is an absence of a fully integrated junior mineral exploration and development business incubator for juniors in Southern Africa. My first objective is to critically evaluate how juniors discover and develop mines. My second is the corollary of this. Why are the shortcomings of juniors, and why do they fail? And then thirdly, why are the 3 integrated mining incubators more successful than standalone juniors? And this culminates in my research aim, which is to develop a conceptual business incubator framework for junior mineral exploration and development for Southern Africa. Going back to my philosophical foundation, and this is vital, and I understand the importance of this in terms of providing a firm or concrete foundation for your thesis. I have a relativist ontology where I see reality as being context dependent, shaped by the perceptions and interactions of the actors in the world in which I live, being entrepreneurs, investors, regulators, and communities. I have an interpretivist and constructivist epistemology, and this is where I see knowledge as being co-created through meaning making between myself as the researcher and the participants. I'm going to be using a qualitative and inductive methodology, and I'm going to be deriving insights from rich contextual evidence gathered through primarily structured and unstructured interviews and secondarily data analysis. And I acknowledge with my axiology and my value bound that my professional experience and reflective stance shape the interpretation. I'm running my 4th junior, and I've been blessed to work for all 3 of the integrated mining incubators, and touch wood, so far the 4 juniors I've worked for have all been able to make commercial success. So together these assumptions form a coherent interpretive paradigm, hopefully ensuring that my worldview, theoretical lens and methodological design remain very tightly aligned, and something which was drummed into me very positively in my first few months at Da Vinci, particularly by Professor Singh, was to ensure the golden thread of the study. So how does this link to the TIPS lens? And this was a very clear directive that came out in the documentation for the doctoral colloquium. My philosophy I've discussed already, and that directly links to the people TIPS lens. My theory, and I'm going to be talking about this in a lot more detail in my literature review, so I'm not going to explain it now, directly links to the technology and innovation lenses. My methodology, how will I study what I'm doing? I've discussed that, and that's directly linked to the systems lens of the TIPS framework. And finally, my methods. What tools will I be using? I've mentioned semi-structured interviews, archival analysis, thematic coding and analysis, and this directly links to the technology and people lens of TIPS. So diving straight into my literature review. The first thing I looked at, which came from Clarissa, were the definitions and generations of incubators. He defines the first generation as being property-based, linked to office space, a second generation, support services and training, a third generation being networked, virtual and sector-specific models. The fourth generation, which has been written about by other authors, is an emerging generation, which looks at integrated digital incubators embedding environmental, social and governance, and particularly important, impact investment principles. The 3 integrated mining incubators, which I'll discuss shortly, actually function as system orchestrators, where they link entrepreneurs, government, academia, financiers and communities together. Well, as they work in this way, 2 other very important management theories come to light. The first one is that of entrepreneurial ecosystems, and that all of the work that I'm looking at the moment is interconnected networks that enable innovation, resource mobilization and venture growth. And network theory is equally vital, because many of these juniors, and the one that I run is no different, are run by single individuals, and therefore relationships are absolutely vital and act as channels for sharing resources, trust and reputation. So if I look at the core theories around business incubation, particularly in the mining space, the foundational one is that of a resource-based view, which looks at unique resources which create your competitive advantage. And these can be defined as some things which are valuable, rare, inimitable, or non-substitutable. 2 obvious ones come to mind. The first one is that of a prospecting or a mining license, and the second one is that of a detailed knowledge of the geology. However, a resource-based view is a static theory, and this needs to be complemented by that of dynamic capabilities. And this looks at how firms modify their resources to respond to changing environments. And an application here is that of adaptive governance and venture scaling. And absolutely vital in this space, and I never heard about these until I actually started my studying, but it absolutely describes the behavior of successful junior entrepreneurs, those of effectuation and bricolage, which basically means making do with what you have and reusing what you have to co-create new futures. So if I step back a moment and look at what are the unique requirements of the mining sector, And this is very important because it forms a foundation for why there are only 3 integrated mining incubators, whereas incubators in other sectors, particularly around pharmaceuticals and technology, are abundant. Well, firstly, the very high technical, particularly geological, funding and commodity pricing uncertainty. It's very difficult to predict. High capital intensity and long gestation. It can easily take you between 10 and 20 years from a discovery to a mine which starts to generate cash flow. And therefore, competitive advantage derives from tacit technical knowledge, data ownership, and deep experience. So overlying this are the constraints, for want of a better word, of ESG, and importantly in the mining industry, something which we call social license to operate, which goes beyond adhering to regulations and laws. And this basically means your incubators must be adaptive. Incubators must also offer risk-sharing finance, technical oversight, and stakeholder alignment to convert all of this uncertainty, which I've mentioned in this slide, into structured learning and commercial success. So if I look at the 3 known integrated mining incubators and I compare that to what is happening in Southern Africa, from a structure perspective, the 162 group is essentially a prospect generator. The Lundin group is a corporate incubator. The Hunter Dickinson group is a venture builder. Those incubators in Southern Africa tend to be very fragmented and mostly associated with universities. The core strengths, these are particularly important. The 162 group is entrepreneurial agility and speed. Lundin group is relational capital, and the Hunter Dickinson group is technical integration. Whereas in Southern Africa, the core strengths are chiefly around grant and more around compliance orientation, which is not particularly helpful if you actually want to build companies. All of the 3 integrated mining incubators look at public IPOs, initial public offerings, or reverse takeovers of a public listing. Whereas in Southern Africa, there is virtually none, but I will call it limited equity participation. The learning cycle could be anything from 3 years or more, but with significant and distinct exit points to allow commercialization. An important point I'd just like to add on to this is that integrated incubators offer a portfolio approach, and that's absolutely vital to distribute risk, share learning, and reallocate resources. So I put the observations of what the 3 integrated incubators are across the world, what's happening in Southern Africa, and the management theories which are relevant to incubation and particularly the mining incubator space. I'd like to propose an initial framework for a junior mining business incubator for Southern Africa. And how this works is a bit like an engine. The core, which is the middle, the darker blue, generates ideas and energy. The middle area are the gears, and these organize and transmit it. And the outer system turns that motion into progress and feedback. So the core engine, which is linked to the tips lens of technology and people, is capability orchestration. And the key theories here are around RBV, dynamic capabilities, effectuation, and bricolage. This helps you build flexibility, resourcefulness, and entrepreneurial drive. The middle layer, which is linked to the tips lens of innovation, are the incubator mechanisms. And this is the working platform where learning, structured again through dynamic capabilities and organizational learning, shares lessons, capital, portfolio approach, very important here, and people across ventures. And finally, the ecosystem interface, as these incubators don't exist in a vacuum, they exist in society in general. And this strengthens relationship, legitimacy, and capital flow through various feedback. And I propose this framework converts the complex theory into a pragmatic framework for capability growth, adaptive learning, and ecosystemic alignment. So drilling this into a bit more detail and how it links to TIPS, the core engine links to technology and people, and essentially one of the most important mechanisms in the core engine is to turn a geological hunch, I think I might have diamonds on my farm, into a formal early stage project. The operational platform uses dynamic capabilities and organizational learning. That's linked to the TIPS lens of innovation. And this makes sure that those lessons, capital and people, are shared effectively across each of the portfolios. And finally, your ecosystem interface, which looks at relational capital, legitimacy, and capital flows, is directly linked to the TIPS lens of systems. And this ensures that what you're doing is aligned within the environment, not just financially, but socially and politically too, particularly because of the importance of the social license to operate. So how is this framework compared to other workers in this field? Well, the first worker to actually describe frameworks for business incubators was Clarissa. I've described his generations of incubators previously, and essentially this was a typology of incubators. It was descriptive and static, and there's very limited attention to capability development. TIS built on that using dynamic capabilities, which are chiefly around sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring assets, but this was theoretical and had very weak ecosystem linkage. And then there's the framework which I've put together, which is a 3-layer TIPS-aligned framework with a core engine, operational platform, and ecosystem interface. The limitation, of course, is that this is a preliminary framework derived from the literature, which will be tested as I go through the research phase. So what are the key research gaps and shortcomings? And I think this would be self-evidential from what I've mentioned so far. Firstly, there are very few models explaining mining-specific integrated incubation, or very few frameworks. Incubation systems in Southern Africa are fragmented and underdeveloped, and they typically focus on maybe one thing, compliance or a piece of technology. There's no comprehensive analysis of what makes mining incubators work. So why do the 3 mining incubators, which have a 0, 0, and a 12.5% failure rate compared to an industry-wide failure rate of 90%, work that way? Fourthly, and I'm quite stunned with this one, is there's a very weak connection between entrepreneurship theory and mining practice. A lot is written about mining in corporates, but very little is written about how do you build and develop mining companies. And this obviously leads on to the final point, a lack of long-term and system-level studies in this area. So therefore, I hope that this study addresses these shortcomings by deriving a locally grounded, empirically tested framework for integrated junior mining in Southern Africa. So moving on to my research methodology, it is that of a qualitative multi-case research. My units of analysis are the 3 mining incubators and serial mining entrepreneurs. I'm going to be using semi-structured interviews and archival filings, primary and secondary. And then I'm going to be looking at generalizing theoretical patterns across diverse cases to look for context-specific themes. So how do I connect my research questions to my methods and expected outcomes? You've already seen my research questions in section 1 of this presentation. That research question 1 directly links to qualitative multiple case analysis of successful and unsuccessful juniors. And here I'll be able to identify strategic, organizational, and contextual enablers of success. My comparative thematic analysis will help to lead to a development of a failure typology. So it's the corollary of the first one, is why do so many companies actually fail? And thirdly, and most importantly, a cross-case comparative analysis where I apply the management theories which I've researched in this literature review to deliver a final conceptual business incubator grounded in our realities here in Southern Africa, but linked to global theories on this basis. So how am I going to select and engage the purposeful participants? These are going to be founders and executives with 2 or more commercial junior venture outcomes. And those of you who were not in my proposal might be quite surprised to see that I've only been able to identify 12, which is not necessarily surprising because 90% fail. So only 12 living participants have had 2 or more successes. I'm obviously going to try and capture contrasting national, cultural, institutional, and capability contexts, and ethical recruitment will obviously be as per Da Vinci protocols. Collecting and analyzing my data through thematic triangulation. My primary method I've stated already. My secondary data method I'm going to be using to triangulate the data which derives from the primary method. My secondary data is obviously going to be archival records, company filings, and public documentation. And between the dialogue between myself as the scholar/practitioner, but being very aware of that, to try and interpret lived experiences as to why many failed and some succeeded. I'll be using thematic coding to identify recurring patterns, and I'm going to be verifying this through peer debriefing. So how am I going to ensure ethical integrity and research credibility? I think one of the most important points of this is almost the last point, is that most of the people who I will be talking to, just like myself, are bound by stock exchange and company law and regulations, which goes far beyond often various ethical considerations. So that's a very, very important point. Ethical clearance is obviously vital as it's part of the Da Vinci process, and informed consent too. I don't know how much will be anonymous. I doubt very, very little, and I equally doubt confidentiality will be required, except maybe in certain specific cases. Reflexivity is absolutely vital because I have to acknowledge my own role and my own interpretive influence in this overall process. So, ladies and gentlemen, Doctors Isaac, Masindi, Mgwenya, and Tosin, I'd now like to conclude with a few thoughts. So how am I going to demonstrate the theoretical and practical contribution of this study? Firstly, from a theoretical perspective, by extending incubation theory, by integrating organizational learning and network perspectives into an RBV-DC effectuation bricolage synthesis, particularly for junior mining and exploration in Southern Africa. From an empirical perspective, to compare this integrated frameworks between global and Southern Africa models. And the two most important things, and this talks to one of the reasons why I'm doing this, and I'm doing this almost as a legacy, as I spent 20 years in corporate exploration and mine development, and the last 20 years running juniors. So I want to leave almost like a legacy blueprint for how you can improve things, particularly for Southern Africa. So that's my practical side, a blueprint for sector-specific incubation in Southern Africa. So what will this lead for society? Economic growth, contribution to sustainable development scenarios, employment, inclusive ownership, and local skill development. Just for interest, even a medium-sized mine will have an employment of and a knock-on employment of over 10,000 people. Taxes and royalties in Southern Africa typically amount to between 30 and 50%. So it generates significant amount to the fiscus. And a local skill development thing is really, really important and something that I'm passionate about. I'm not passionate about regulatory 26% BEE, but I am passionate about local mining entrepreneurs owning 100% of these kind of businesses and being empowered to actually do so. So hopefully this bridges theory and practice and advances mining entrepreneurship, scholarship, and hopefully, and this is how I will almost measure the success of this, leads to greater junior success and greater economic contribution in the region. So my next steps, doctors, ladies and gentlemen, is obviously to pass this doctoral colloquium, and I'm sure I'll hear from you in good time on that. Following that, I'll update whatever I need to update, submit and receive ethical clearance, and then crack on with conducting pilot interviews, main data collection, thematic analysis, and draft results. And these timelines were pretty much what I put in my proposal when I initially presented that. So thank you very much indeed for your time. And Dr. Isaacs, I hand the floor back to you.
Mr. Campbell, sorry, thank you very much. You have 5 minutes to spare. So thank you very much for finishing within time. I'm going to hand over to the two panel members. I see Dr. Masindi and Dr. Ngwenya. Dr. Masindi, you may proceed, please. You're still muted.
Thanks, Dr. Isaacs. Mr. Campbell, thanks for the presentation. I think I learned a lot about mining and junior miners and all those. If I start at your literature review, I think that's where the meat of the thing is, where you have identified the key research gaps and shortcomings. So from the literature, what are the fundamental differences between junior miners ventures and any other startups that this study will accommodate in the development of the framework from the literature that you have looked at? In addition to that, did you find any major contradictions in the literature that study aims to address? Something that is contradictory to the objective of these studies. Then you can move on to where you just started the literature review. I see you have looked at incubation models, your HD, Dixon, Landmin group, your 162 groups. And in the review of the literature on business incubators, what is the precise, probably in a single sentence, theoretical gap that you are addressing with this study? You have talked about what you have learned from the integrated mining incubators. Can you just elaborate? Why can't they not be directly applied to Southern Africa? Probably support that with some of the findings in your literature. The objective 3 in your slide with the problems and objectives and aim seem to be misaligned to the problem statement. I don't understand how a framework that this study will develop will differ or supplement the 3 incubation missions in the one that you have looked at. Probably you can just talk me through that. What is it that this framework will do to address the problem that you are trying to address? So the study is in Southern African perspective. Can you talk through how you will deal with the idiosyncrasies of these Southern African countries, where your model is meant to look at and address some of the problems that you have raised? The other thing is on the title slide, what will happen if I take out conceptual? and I just go a business incubator framework for junior miners and stuff like that. If you take it conceptual from the type, maybe talk to it in that angle. You have a case of Southern African perspective, which for me is a multiple case study, probably of a single industry or corporation, as you put it. That's why I brought the idiosyncrasies of it. So if you are going to have a framework that looks at all these countries, how are you going to look at all the regulatory aspects of each country and make it seamless in your approach? I just want to hear your word on it. Maybe I'll follow up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Masindi. I've listed 8 points there, and I'll try and be as swift as I can to allow follow-up if I can. Firstly, if I get your first question, it was around the contrasting points between other business incubators, which are very, very common throughout the industry, and mining business incubators itself. And that's chiefly a function of the mining industry, in that there is a lot more uncertainty in the mining industry, particularly in the exploration phase, and there's far less capital available for exploration projects, because what you're selling is the prospectivity of a region, which is geology. You're selling the political risk, which is generally measured by the Fraser Institute, and you're selling essentially the success of the founder. And then secondly, the amount of money required to start to generate more money, commercial, through dividends and cash flow, is actually very, very high. And then thirdly, there are major time horizons, particularly if one considers the ESG and social license to gather. Your second question around contradictions is a very good question, and I haven't actually addressed with it in this particular thesis. And that some would argue, and there's an author called Wagner in particular, and I can't remember the date, who would argue that, and I think he argued this before he had sight of the Hunter Dickinson group, and oh, sorry, I've forgot that. Bear with me a minute. Okay, I'm just going to leave it on this one. Sorry about that.
It's fine.
So just take a deep breath and go back to where I was. Yes, your second question. There are some authors such as Wagner, and I can't remember the exact date, who argued that the business incubation is not a viable concept in the mining space because of the reasons I've actually just stated. But he didn't mention in the literature that he'd covered the 3 mining incubators, which I've had the privilege of working for, and I can't find actually any others who've had very, very good success in this area. So about the precise, and your third question was about the precise theoretical gap. And if I look at this, this one, for example, in that there's quite a lot of management theory which talks about business incubation, particularly in those areas which are fast moving or just offer services. Fast moving would obviously be your IT and pharmaceutical areas, and there are others, of course. And we've got a great incubators here in Stellenbosch and in that area, and of course the Silicon Valley in the United States, and the Middle East, by the way, is growing something bigger or larger than Silicon Valley at the moment. And then TEAS developed that in terms of dynamic capabilities, but nobody has adapted this for the environment of junior mining incubators, and nobody has adapted this with an ecosystemic framework. And if I could just quickly jump to your question of number 6, and I'm obviously going to come back to your other ones about the idiosyncrasies in Southern Africa. If you look at the first 2 circles of my proposed framework is the core engine and the operational platform are almost independent of the jurisdiction in which you are working in, because this basically looks at converting a geological idea. It could be a coal idea in Botswana, it could be a lithium idea in Zimbabwe. It doesn't really matter at this point. It's only once you've actually taken it through the operational platform to the ecosystem interface where the particular idiosyncrasies and the particular uniqueness around that country's laws and regulations and financial environment actually come into play. So it's only on that final layer in which we actually start to look at this. And if we look at the three mining incubators which I've identified, 162 Lundin and the Hunter Dickinson Group, although they operate in Ireland, Canada, they have projects throughout the world. And typically with the 162 Group, they're projects in areas of low geological or technical risk, but high political risk. And they can do that because of their entrepreneurial ability and speed. So going back, Dr. Masindi, to your fourth question, as why have these not been correctly applied in Southern Africa? That's it's such a good question that I've been trying to raise money for juniors in Southern Africa for 20 years. And we don't have the skills. I think I'm going to call it the skills. And this could be a legacy of apartheid, where we only looked at those companies which actually had strong cash flows, and your analysts could identify, okay, this must be a good company because it's generating a strong cash flow, because I can look at the discounted cash flow. The identification of juniors is a much more qualitative, much more judgmental exercise. I mentioned earlier, it's around three things. It's around prospectivity, which is technical. It's around political risk, which you can sort of quantify. And then thirdly, it's around the success or track record of the founders. And my experience with fund managers in Southern Africa, and Zimbabwe, Botswana, and South Africa, is that they don't know how to measure this and they don't invest in it. And this is one of the reasons why across most of Africa, all of Africa, is there's predominantly strong overseas ownership, because that's where the initial capital and money actually comes from. So one of my drives or legacy project, my legacy kind of give back to society here, is to empower local mining entrepreneurs to raise local money so they start to own it from the very beginning, and it's not coming just through regulatory means such as Black economic empowerment. Moving on to question 5, which relates to objective 3. What I was looking at here, Dr. Masindi, there were 3 aspects. Why are some juniors successful? Why are the majority of juniors why do they fail? But why, bearing in mind the significantly higher success rate of the integrated incubators, what do they do compared to what other single juniors don't do? And I felt that putting these 3 objectives together are necessary to develop that conceptual framework. The title slide, hopefully I've addressed section 6, and just if question 6, and maybe I'd just like to add on to that, is that this is something which I've spoken about with senior ministers of mines, etc., in actually all 3 countries I've mentioned, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Botswana, and they would all like to see much stronger local entrepreneurial activity in the mining sector, not through legislation, but in the same way that we see this across many other sectors, but we don't see it in the mining sector because actually there's no framework to follow. And I hopefully will present that framework through the course of my study. So your question number 7, why have I put the word conceptual? Because I haven't, maybe in my kind of understanding, and Dr. Masindi, maybe I've got this wrong. I proposed a conceptual framework because I haven't actually tested it yet. It's something that's going to be derived from the literature. It's going to be derived from the interviews and archival analysis. But in my kind of rather simple way of perhaps looking at it is that I can't really call it anything more than a conceptual until it's actually been proven. And your final question, number 8, Dr. Masindi, around regulatory framework, I hope I answered that from your question number 6, where the ecosystemic framework, ecosystem interface, which is the final layer, is only something which is looked at when you actually start working in that particular country. And so it's not necessarily vital in terms of, if I look at this slide, turning a geological hunch into a project, and then making sure that you have capital allocation, people allocation, and resource allocation shared across the different portfolios. Dr. Masindi, I know I've only given like superficial answers to your questions, but I tried to be respectful of time.
Yeah, thanks. Can I use a minute out of your 5 minutes that you spare?
Please proceed, Dr. Masindi.
Just to make a comment. I see. I even heard you talking about the issues of lack of skills in the funding of all these junior miners, etc. Did you look at the issues of risk appetite from those, the owners of capital in those spaces? I think you need to probably get somewhere in your background where you can argue through the risk appetite and how probably in your framework you will attract capital so that you can solve some of the issues that you have raised. Also, you need to probably convince the readers that a business incubator is the right solution for this, for junior miners, as opposed to other incentives, because you can go and say, like, I'm giving funding gaps incentives, I'm giving tax incentives and stuff like that. And maybe you need to really argue and convince that incubators are the solutions. And I think you have the capability to do that, hearing you speaking. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Masindi. Dr. Isaacs, can I make a brief comment on that?
Sure.
On the first question around risk appetite, it's such a good question. The portfolio theory states if you're an ultra high net worth individual, that you will allocate 10% of your funds to high risk investments. And I illustrated the Lassonde curve in my thesis. And if these juniors are successful, then you can almost make up to 100 times your money. One of the juniors I ran, African Diamonds PLC, returned 90 times to your shareholder. It is very high risk and it's very high potential reward, but equally very high potential loss. So in Southern Africa, you don't have necessarily that number of ultra high net worth individuals, and those people who are in that category tend to put their money offshore and then allow the offshore people to invest the high risk stuff. So that portfolio theory is actually very, very important, and I have partly addressed it, but I need to do more work on it in terms of the Lassonde curve in my thesis. And then why incubators? It's actually a very, very good question. Is that having worked in this space for 2 decades now and witnessed multiple failures across my colleagues and successes in the 3 incubators I've actually worked within, is that it's not just a simple thing. It's not just around giving a capital allowance. For example, in Canada, they have flow-through shares. We had something called Section 12J of the Income Tax Act, which was bastardized by industry. So it never worked, it never created something. It's a lot more complex than just 1 or 2 simple things. And my literature research basically just touched the surface of all the kind of skills and people you need to make these kind of things work. And I hope my research will actually demonstrate the same, because this is something that I've said to often many people, that a junior CEO is a chief cook and bottle washer. He needs to have a multiple of skills across, needs to have a massive appetite for risk, needs to have a very, very thick skin, and must be prepared for multiple failures. So thank you, Dr. Masindi. Very, very, very interesting comments and questions.
Thank you, Dr. Masindi. Dr. John, sorry, I actually meant that you had to go first, but you may proceed.
No, that's fine. Dr. Masindi covered quite a bit, but I will make a few comments. James, thanks for your well thought out presentation. I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear, Doctor.
Thank
yes.
you. All right. And also the passion that you exuded. I said, oh, this fellow is very passionate about this study. But I'm going to give you some comments and also questions. And let me upfront say to you, I have also read your proposal. That is right from especially your literature review and your methodology. But I also looked at your initial proposal as well. So I'm going to be referring to those kinds of documents, so that not necessarily here per se, because at the end of the day, you will have to write one document. Now on this, let's start with your problem statement here. Slide, just go to it. Right. I know that in your proposal, I think it is paragraph 2, 2.1, 1.5. You've got it there in detail. But what is lacking in both documents, the presentation and your proposal, is the following. Having stated the problem, my question is, it's a question of relevance. Why is it a problem? It does not come out clear. You just stated the scenario, but there's a loop missing. Why is it a problem? In other words, who is affected? Why does it matter? You see the why element there, I think it's missing for me. Maybe you'll respond, but it's not there in both your documents. And also, I do not get a sense of, in the problem statement, what are you going to do about it? What steps will you take to address that problem? So those two final points are still missing, and in both of your documents. But I picked up something in your literature review summary right at the end. There is a bit of that. I think it's on page 59. If you can note page 59, there's a bit of that. If you can take that, rephrase it, and add on to your problem statement, I think it might complete the picture. Let's go to your research or research questions. I think Dr. Masindi commented, but my comment is, in all your questions, these are objectives, but your questions part, where are your questions? The next slide, I think. If you go to your questions.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah. I don't know, but I was reading both of the documents. Yes, I
know where it is, Doctor. I know it's there.
All right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. I see you have a tendency of using, especially look at research question number 3. You seem to be looking at two constructs there. There's always a how and a why. Because your study is qualitative, I would have expected that you'd be using how things are done. You want to develop a framework of some sort. I think using the two, I would have preferred that you split those. There must be a why question and a how question, not in one sentence. It does not make academic sense. So look at that. In a number of instances, you have that duplication of how and why. And I think you must consider to split that in terms of your questions. Then the next observation, there is a slide on theoretical. Let's go to a theoretical conceptual framework. It's a beautifully done slide. Yeah.
This one.
No.
Or is it this one?
No, the other one. Tabular form. Core concept, I think. Yeah, this one. This is the one. if I look at your subheadings, you've got your research layer, which is okay, your core question to some extent, but here I have a problem with the third one, representative theories. I'm getting the impression that that whole column will talk about theories, but it's not, because you start off with the ontology and so on and so on. Then you've got the theories are there. Can you see what you are mixing? I'm
Yes.
saying that I think you're mixing sorts of things there.
Got it. Understood. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I picked that one up.
Yeah.
Now let's zoom into your literature review. Dr. Masindi commented at length. Yeah, I think you did a good job on the literature review, but maybe let's get to your gaps slide. I want to go back to it. I know there has been a reference to it. Yeah, are these your gaps? Yes. Just a bit of advice or guidance is that I'm quite happy with how you have outlined the gaps, but to improve your academic presentation, there is terminology that you use, and then just put a descriptor. For instance, some of it could be related to what I call evidence gap. At the end of the day, this is an evidence gap because of ABC. You can slot these things in. There's something called knowledge gap. There's something called practical knowledge gap. There's something called empirical gap. Something called methodological gap. Population gap, theoretical gap. All I'm saying that bring that vocabulary. I'll put in my notes all the same, so that when you discuss this, they fall under a particular description. At the moment, we understand it's just but the actual gap scientifically, I can't really say your study covers one or two gaps. These are the gaps. So it's a question of terminology. It's just a guidance on my part. Let's sampling. Yes, let's go to the sampling slide. I thought Dr. Masindi will pick it up, but let me go to it.
Just back.
The samples, yes. Can you see? In as much as you talked about 12, in a research, academic research, we expect some kind of finite numbers, not a range like 8 to 12. Can you see my 8 to 12 there? I would expect 12 participants. And if there are deviations in the actual research, you'll explain that later. But in terms of your intended work, you've got to be very, very finite there. So I picked that one up, and I also picked up something like a purposeful sampling, founders and executive with 2 or more commercial, you see, that kind of thing.
Yes.
The first one, you've got to be exact there. It doesn't make any academic sense. It's like you're still guessing. And then there was something on thematic analysis. I think you kept referring to it. Thematic analysis is a methodology of some sort. I'd expected you to zoom into a specific software that you'll be using in that thematic analysis. I did not pick it up in both your documents, and there are a number of softwares. I can't tell you now, but specify which one you'll be using for your research. Then I've got a few questions. I think the rest have been covered. Oh yes, just in your document, I picked up that you still use lots of bullet points in your actual proposal. I think we discouraged the use of bullet points there. Quite a number of them. I said, what's happened? It's not a presentation, the actual document. Just eliminate the bullet points and use something different, your ABC, but not bullet points. Bullet points are meant for presentation. Then a few questions from me. In your literature review, 2 of them, what was your exclusion and inclusion criteria? Which how did you decide that this is the literature or the source that I'm using? In other words, your exclusion and exclusion criteria in choosing appropriate sources. If you could tell me how you did that, exclusion and inclusion criteria. And secondly, well, the gaps you have identified, I've commented on the gaps, but I want you to be very specific at the end of the day. Use the scientific knowledge, but I think you've done a good job, and but you can still improve. Then on the methodology, if you could just briefly tell us how you designed your research. I'm talking about your research design. In about a minute or two, this ABCD, what's contained in your research design? That would be quite helpful. And lastly, what other methods did you explore and then decided, mine is not mixed method, mine is not and quantitative, mine is qualitative. What other methods have you explored, and why particularly this method that you have decided to use for your study? I think, as I said, I gave you both comments and also questions, and if you could, I can hear your voice, to use Dr. Masindi's expression. Let me hear your voice on these things.
Okay, just before you continue, Mr. Campbell, we have about, say, 4 minutes, just a little bit more than 4 minutes remaining.
Okay, great. I'm then, Dr. John, I'll have to be swift. On your first point about why is it a problem? I tried to address that, and I need to make it more bold, is that if we don't find more minerals, we don't have a sustainability development scenario. And seeing juniors are the engine of discovery, and if they continue to fail, we're not going to have sufficient cobalt, lithium, etc. for our cell phones, etc., and enable the green transition. Number 3 was around, I hope my framework will deliver a blueprint for future development. Numbers 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 were comments. So I'm going to jump to numbers 11 and 12. Inclusion and exclusion criteria for literature. So inclusion was anything to do with mining incubation, and I didn't go down a rabbit warren of looking in detail at non-mining incubators. And I tried to draw what were the key management theories across the 3 integrated mining incubators which I'd identified, and not try and clutter it up, which there was a tendency, and I went down that rabbit warren and I came back again, of adding a whole load of other stuff just to make it all things to all people. And then finally, because I'm aware I've probably got 1 minute left or thereabouts, Dr. Isaacs, is on my methodology. Is why did I select the research design I selected? My natural tendency, and you may have gathered this, is quantitative. I'm a natural scientist, and my master's was in the quantitative area. And it's my comfort zone, but I wanted to go out of my comfort zone. But that's not the motivation behind it. Is that there are so many kind of subtle, deep insights to be gained from those mining entrepreneurs who've been successful. Because as I noted in my sampling diagram, it's between, I've only been able to identify 12, so it's a very, very rare thing. And having worked for many of these people, and know probably most of them, is that there are some very, very, very deep insights to be gained about how are they successful, whereas 90% are not. And that I thought I can only actually get through very deep discussions with these mining entrepreneurs, and then trying to elicit themes across them. And I use the 8 to 12 because I hope by the time I get to 8, I'm saturated. Well, I probably will be, but the study is saturated, so I don't actually need to go to 12. Sorry for giving you a very short answers, Dr. John, but I'm aware of Dr. Isaac's time pressure.
Sorry, Dr. John, I'm going to give you a minute or so to, if you have any follow-up questions, because I know you. Okay, so let me just stop this alarm.
No, that's okay. I think I'll put the other comments in my report.
Okay, thank you. As chairperson, I just have a few comments as well. I won't be long. I'm not going to ask you any questions. Just in terms of being Mr. Campbell, you have an inordinate amount of knowledge of the topic that you are researching at the moment. But I think you forget that the reader might not have that same kind of knowledge. So in all cases, and it applies to all students, just introduce us to some topics. Be a little bit more explicit. It will take a couple of sentences more to introduce concepts or ideas to us a little bit in a little bit more detail, other than assuming that the reader will know. I mean, it's not wrong that you think that way, but I think when you write academically, it is necessary for you to introduce certain concepts, constructs, terminology that's you use on a daily basis that we might not encounter until presentations such as this. So just from that perspective, I also just wanted to mention, while Dr. John mentioned it, your numbering is very inconsistent. So you would have on page 61, for example, 2.8.1.2, and under that you have number 1, 2, 3. So you either have it as an A and a B or Roman numerals, but you can't start with the main numbering in sub numberings. It's small items, but I want to just focus on that quickly as well. Then your problem statement, just go back. We don't have to do it now. It was dealt with, but it seems incomplete. Something is missing for me in terms of, and Dr. John also touched on it. Something is missing in terms of what the relevance. Where does this go? Yes, there's a lack of. So what? There's a couple of words that either need to be shuffled around or added to it, and I did make some notes, and in my report, I will also just make that recommendation. It is not wrong. I can understand what you are trying to say, but it's not articulated exactly as a problem statement. So when I pick it up, I don't see what the problem is, even though if we sit here, we can clearly understand what it is, but a reader won't have the luxury of the presentation or having engaged you in this way. So if you can just maybe look at that. I think you may want to go back to the Wagner, not the Wagner operas, the Wagner theory that you were speaking about earlier. I think it may be necessary just to articulate that, to put it into perspective again, seeing that it was a question that Dr. Ngwenya raised, and you did respond to. Having that knowledge at hand, it may be valuable for you just to include it, even if it is as a delimitation to say that you have looked at it, but it's not going to be used as part of the study. Yes, Atlas TI, you do use Atlas TI. You mentioned Atlas TI and Vivo and one other software that I don't recognize immediately or call immediately. But you have to, in this study, specifically say at a doctoral level, you are going to use Atlas TI and Vivo or any other software. I would want to recommend Atlas TI because you get free access to it at DaVinci. Otherwise, you'll have to access that yourself. At a doctoral level, we want to see how you have developed your themes and concepts, and that you've actually applied the use of software in your thematic analysis. I think that is critical at this level. At master's level, I don't think we would be that fussy, but at this level, we would need to see that, please. Yes, thank you very much for a very neat and well-presented presentation. I think it is worth mentioning because it stands out that you know what you're doing. So I'm very happy about that. I think I've covered just about everything. Review software. Oh yes, and then in terms of the sample, don't anticipate that you're going to saturate at 8. I think go for the maximum, which is 12. State that it's 12. If you do saturate at 8, you saturate at 8. You may find that it's 10 or 11, or you don't even reach saturation for that matter. But 12 at a doctoral level is already low, but space that you are in, and in terms of your problem statement and your aims and objectives, it is, and you have to back that just up with other literature to show in the space that you are researching, accessing samples or populations and then getting to a sample of this size is actually supported. I think we always make the example of, if you're going to interview CEOs of aircraft manufacturers, there's only going to be not even a handful of that. So this is more or less the same kind of phenomena that we're looking at. Just support that with some literature as well, please, so we know where the sample comes from. But I would say go for the maximum of 12 at a doctoral level. That is significant. Maybe you can just elaborate a little bit more in terms of your secondary data. You're touching on it, but if there's some clarity that you can provide as to what it is you will be looking at, that would also help. You don't have to go in all the granular detail, but maybe just from a high to a lower level, the documentation that you'd be using. I don't know if you have any. I didn't ask you any questions, so there's no point for you to answer. But if there's any point that you want to raise or anything that you want to ask or state at this point, you're welcome to do so before I just give Dr. Tosin an opportunity.
Dr. Isaacs, your comments are all very clear. You made comments rather than questions, but if I've missed anything there, I'm very happy to address it. But before I hand over to Dr. Tosin, I'd just like to thank you all very much for your time to listen to me and provide me with such excellent comments.
No, thank you. The pleasure is ours, and thank you very much for a good presentation and for a very interesting topic. Just in conclusion, there was one candidate that just graduated now in October, and I want to find the title for you. Exploring the effect of entrepreneurial effectuation and bricolage on intentions, behaviors, and perceived success among entrepreneurs in resource-constrained environments. So I don't know if you want to just maybe cast an eye over that at some point, seeing that you also touched on that, but that was just a graduate thesis, a title that I read out to you now. Dr. Tosin, anything from your side?
Thank you, Dr. Gavin. No, I'm well done, James. I think you presented well, and with passion, as you always do. And to the panelists, I do appreciate your feedback. I think some pertinent comments and points made. In particular, Dr. Gavin, we will be using QDA as a thematic analysis, and James will put that in and describe it and define it. But I really appreciate the feedback. I think it's just going to enrich James's thesis even more, and I appreciate that feedback, and I thank you all. And again, James, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tosin. Mr. Campbell, thank you. You may exit your presentation. You're welcome to stay on and listen to the rest.